Hello everybody. So today we're going to look at my Logic Pro X template, something that you can copy. And the reason I'm showing this is because A, you need to know a start point for when I go through my Composer series, but also because the students that I do workshops with tend to be very surprised when I tell them that the deadline for a lot of the pieces I make can often be somewhere between half a day for let's say a minute to 3 minute piece of music. That's literally getting the brief, having just about half a day once you put it all together, send it to them before 5 o'clock, up to 2 days. So either way, they're very, very short periods of time, and the way to get around that is to have a template that you know inside out, and you can literally open up Logic and just start playing. You don't have to faff around with various things. And as you're going, the other addition to this is that you're mixing on the go, which is very important. So clients are always going to want a track which is pretty much there, or at least sounds like it's there, because they're not music producers, they're not engineers, they're not going to know necessarily, unless you've worked with them a long time, that you can produce the right sounding music, good quality music. So you have to send it to them very, very close to as a finished sound as you can. The parts might not be there, and you can explain certain things, but yeah, it's got to sound very, very good. So here we go. So this is how it looks when you first open it up. It opens up on 48K because that's what film music, the time it needs to be in, and how you export it needs to be in 48K 9 times out of 10. I can't do any higher than that because the sessions get too large, and even the brand new Mac Mini is not going to be able to handle that. So 48K is where we start. I'll often be dragging in temp music or sound effects or my music from a previous version, right? So that goes at the top, and I have a button on my MIDI keyboard that allows me to solo and mute the reference track. So just clicking solo allows me to listen to my current track, listen to the old one, listen to the current, listen to the old one. Often there'll be a video that I've dragged in as well, and it's a very simple process to understand where we've come from. That goes for mixing music for artists as well. I have an audio track that's just set to go, and an instrument track, again set to go with nothing on it. Then we start to get into the back end. So we've got our music, and the main idea here is if I can just go here to here. Right, so the main process here is that we have our wide tracks, right? It's a pyramid. And then up from there we've got stems, groups that are affecting various instruments, and then up from there we've got different buses that are affecting, that we can use to control them, and then finally we've got our output. And even our output needs to go to another output. So we'll get to all this, but there's a chain that builds to our final single track. And the reason we are doing that is because I need to have control over every step of the way. I don't want to get to the end of this huge piece of music that I've made, and the artist or the film director says they just want a version that doesn't have the drums in it, or they want a version where the drums are 1 decibel louder. Well, I would just want to be able to just drag one thing and affect that. I don't want to have to, especially with automation, you can't drag easily 1 dB out of all the drums. So you'll understand that that's one of the main cases. Second thing is things will need individual treatment, but then they'll also need grouped treatment. And the benefit of doing grouped treatment is that it imparts a general feeling and sound. Let's say you use an EQ. and a certain EQ has a certain sound to it, and you set it in a certain way, and you want it to affect everything in that group so that everything has that little bit of a bump or a little bit of a dip or something like that, it'll make more sense as we go along. In addition to all of that, so you've got all of the music, we've also got our effects chains that are off to the side. That's your reverbs and delays and stuff like that. Let me go back to the screen here. So let's just start with saying about the mix bus. So as you can see, I've created a mix bus simply by creating an audio track, or you can go into here and you can go create a bus, sorry. You can create up to 256 of them, and I've got it set on 256 because I wanted the final thing. So I've created one that I can then route everything into the output, stereo output that comes along with Logic Pro. So the reason for that is because alongside my track is my reference track and also sound effects, and I don't want my sound effects and my old track to go through another line of processing that finalizes the sound of my music, right? I want the sound effects to sound like they did when I got them sent to me, so they have to bypass everything else and go to the stereo output too, without having to go through this. So if you just make music and you put everything on the stereo out, then you screwed yourself. And it allows us on the stereo out just to put things like references. So an LUFS meter, a loudness meter, and also I use SonarWorks. So that has to go on last because that manipulates the sound to better fit my room. Lander sessions I use for not just collaborating with people, but also to send a feed to the client during a live feed. So various things like that, right? So if we work backwards from the finishing line, we have our mix bus, right? Now, to me, this is the most important part of the whole template. And it just makes everything glue together, sound fantastic, sound like it's ready for radio, and we haven't even done anything. Now, a lot of what you'll see is a set and forget system. I set it, I calibrate it, and I very rarely touch it. This has been my mix bus for a long time. It's recently got some SSL stuff added in it, but here we go. We've got Alicia envelope. I saw this on a mastering engineer tutorial, and this is sort of what I could tell that he had it set up as. And what this does is just add a little bit of shape to the transient. It's very, very subtle, what makes a difference. I use Plugin Alliance yearly, so I've got access to their plugins, of which Alicia is one. NIF Audio is just an EQ that I haven't got anything set except the filter, because I want to filter out some of the music very, very low and very, very high before I go into my main series of compressors. People will have their favourites. I highly recommend, if you're starting out, to go for the SSL G bus compressor. That's the classic sound that everybody kind of wants to go to. There's other elements like the glue and various versions, right? But for me, I really like this, which is its own. It's something called the Neve 33609, which is an infamous compressor, but it is based off the SSLG comp. It's just quite a punchy one. I've got the SSL there. I've also got Shadow Hills set up. What this one is set up to do is it creates quite a large sound. So if I'm struggling, this is where this element of control comes in. If I just need the music to be that little bit like wider and bigger sounding, then I use this compressor instead of the others, and it just gets there. I don't know why, but it does. I often pair my compressors, so I'll have one that's punchy and I'll have one that's very, very silky smooth, and this Alicia allows that. If you were to see some music coming in, you'd see that all of these things are doing 1 to 2 dB of reduction, so very, very small. So you can see that that one's activated, as is that one. I then have an EQ that's doing a slight boost, again 1 or 2 dBs here, in fact less. Got half a dB at 6.5, 1 dB at 90, and on the other sides, this is in mid-side mode, so that was doing the middle part of now the side is doing half a dB at 1.2k and half a dB at 15. Sometimes I adjust these very, very slightly. I've got an AMEC that I can access if I need to, another EQ. A tape machine just adds something sometimes. This is something I use a lot. So I find in my music, I get a lot of this like 6k frequency, right? Even though I'm boosting it over there, right? Forget about that. And I don't know if there's anything else like this out there, but what this allows to do is just tame it a little bit. It's effectively just a well, it is what it says it is, a high frequency compressor, but it's hitting the high frequencies and compressing them. Difference between this and a multi-band compressor is, for whatever reason, this just works so much better. It's a simpler thing and sounds really, really good, whereas I can't get the same effect with a simple multi-band. This is an interesting plugin that I very rarely touch, but sometimes. I was watching a video on Luca Pretalese, who gives lots of amazing information out, and one of the things he does is, so everything we've done so far is like compressing it in, that sense. What this plugin allows you to do is do something that he likes to do. So what these buttons here do is do the opposite of compression, which is called expansion. Now, I won't get into too many details about it because it would be another 30-minute video, but I highly recommend looking at Luca Pretalese and understanding what he does in terms of expansion. So what expansion does is it basically elevates it and also compresses it at the same time by basically raising the volume as opposed to compressing the tops of it. And when you subtly put that together with compression, then you can find yourself really getting these, like, it sounds compressed, but it's punchy. So that's in there sometimes. A nice multi-band compressor. This has a certain sound to it as well that imparts more of an aggressive sound to the whole mix, even though it doesn't look like it's doing anything. This one is the opposite, even though it's got the same settings. This is where plugins are not built the same. This one smoothens everything out, even though it's got the same settings, right? And then finally a limiter. So you've got compression, EQ, and a limiter to make it sound, to bring the level up as much to a normal amount for our clients to listen to, for release, all the rest of it, right? And you'll see that it says 1 and -1, right? -1 because a lot of the stuff I make will find its way onto YouTube and things like that, right? So you need -1 in your ceiling so that it's not clipping at 0. And -1 seems the best level that I've researched. So that's, you've got digital 0 and we're just operating at -1. Inaudible difference, but makes a huge difference in terms of distortion. And I'm only gaining 1. I'm not gaining like 5 or 6 like I would be if I just slapped a limiter on at the end. And that's because my template is set up such that everything I'm listening to at the same level I'm always listening to, speaker-wise, means that as I push things in harder, I should generally never have to touch any of these plugins, and it will come out at the right LUFS that I need. If it's not, I will raise the volume of the whole mix. Sometimes I'll get to the end and I'm a dB short or something, and yes, I will pump this up to what it needs to get to. But the options are there that I don't have to, and I don't have to hit any plugins too hard, because doing that makes them sound rough. So that was the most important one. If I unhide this, you'll see that I have quite a lot of things. So we'll continue to work backwards. What my approach is something that is very, very common among the leading mixers, and why their mixes sound so good, is a approach that has been made of notoriety by a mix engineer called Michael Brower, called brow-rising. And what that is if I go back to, well, no, I'll try and show you on here a second. What that is you've got A, B, C, D, E, right? Stay with me here. A, B, C, D, E, and they feed into the mix bus. So what am I trying to say here? I've got 5 buses that feed into the mix bus. So we've got mix bus here, and I've got 5 lined across. We've got drums, we've got another one that's great for vocals, another one that's great for guitars, another one that's great for the background information like background synths, reverbs, and then finally I've got a 5th one, E, which is just empty. It's just for stuff to be able to pass through. Why have I done that? Well, every instrument is not the same. We don't want the same effect from every instrument. So if you slap, this is why this process is so complicated, convoluted, but why it's so important and why major mix engineers do this, is because if you've got a guitar part and you're like cha 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 cha, but you've got a silky smooth vocal, those two things don't go well together. You want space in your music where things can have their moment and they're not affected by everything else. So yes, we have a mix bus that affects everything, but it's doing it very subtly. So what most people will do when they're starting out, which is the wrong thing to do, is you have a load of instruments and they feed into one mix bus, which is hammering the compressors and you're hammering the limiter, and it just makes everything sound squashed and lifeless. If you look at Michael Brower's, and Chenzo Townsend does this to a small extent, Spike Stent, all of these great mix engineers who do all of the current tracks in circulation, right? What's it today? 2024. We're talking Harry Styles and all the like, right? But the reason why I used Brow-Rise as an example is because of Coldplay. And if you look at all his mixes, they sound huge, right? And I worked for ages to figure out why do his sound so big and mine, I can't get there. At the time, when I was learning all this 5-6 years ago, track width and all this sort of stuff was so big. You had M83 just sounding these, like, making these amazingly thick wall of sounds, and this is how you get there, basically. Let's go back to the screen. So I've got another 33609 with an EQ doing a slight push in various directions. Won't go into too much detail, but go down the rabbit hole of finding out about these mix engineers. Michael Brower has loads of info on it. Spike Stent, Chenzo Townsend. I'm just copying things that they've done with the plugins that I've got available, and I've tweaked them over the years to suit me. So B is my drum rhythm track. So I want my drums and bass to generally go in the same thing. And this is set up to better enhance that. So again, we're talking, I've got 0.4, 0.5 boost and cut at 60 and 12. I've got this set on the UK setting, which I hate saying because I am from the UK. But what that means is it's an all buttons in scenario. I've got drums are very important, so that's why I've got lots of different things there. Not sure that should be there. C is guitars and general transient information, more transient instruments, let's say. It has more width push on it that goes into like an old style limiter. Again, we could go all day on reasons why, but I just want you to see what's possible. Again, like an oldie silky smooth compressor for the D channel with a bit of EQ and again a bit of width on there, because in D I have a lot of the background effects and things like that going through. So A's my main one, vocals, things like that, piano. B's rhythm, so drums and bass moving together. C, guitars, other stuff that you want to go in and out of those things. And D is like stuff silking around the back. E is just allows me to have a channel available to go through if I don't want to do any more treatment to it. I've also got these things called loop trotter, saturate, that do this little tiny bit of like trying to bring an analog desk into it. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. So working back, what you can do in Logic, which you can do in all of them I'm sure, is you have drum buses, but you also have folders. So what do I mean by that? You've got an audio track here. Let's say you have 3 audio tracks. Group them together, create track stack. You can create a summing stack or a folder stack. So a summing stack means that when I create this, it effectively creates a bus channel that all of the 3 feed into. And then that bus, which is now 715, can be sent and go wherever it needs to go, right? We can also do a typical folder, and that will be literally putting it into a folder. What you can do with the folder is obviously adjust the volume, but you can't do anything else. So you'd have to create the bus yourself. So my template is based off of that idea, but at the same time, Logic has a little bit of a glitch still, where the summing folders don't work all the time when I've got a lot of instruments on the go. So sometimes you may see that I've got, for instance here, I've got a folder, standard folder, but I've got the drum bus that I've created that the kicks will go into, snares and all sorts, right? Kicks all as well, that is a summing folder. Then we go into music. I've put some a lead vocal chain here that again actually has the same system as all of those A, B, C, D buses, in that the best way to treat vocals tends to be treating them as 5 vocals, splitting them among 5 different sounds, like the nose, the chest, the throat, and all these things, and manipulating it with total control. So it's very convoluted. We won't go into that today because this is about composition and stuff. But you can see there, vocal compressors. I've got an absolute ton of them. But essentially my music will go into all one. That's where that finishes. So assume we've built a track here. They're simply coming into the buses that they need to be, like violins or guitars or whatever, lead guitar, so on and so forth. But I have, which you can see here, VCA. VCA is simply a volume control. And the reason why I do that is because the main thing I get back is not necessarily just bring down the violins. It might be, I want the drums louder. And to do that, we've got to bring the music down, because we might already be up here with the drums. So we're just bringing in levels of control the whole time. Okay. Then I've got lots of reverb set up. Way to think about reverbs is we want to have an individual sound, right? We want to have a uniqueness to ourselves. And the one way we can do that within the scope of having all these library instruments that everybody else has got access to is we can use unique reverbs that nobody else is using. They impart a huge part of sound that just makes it sound different depending on what you're going for. Now, other than choosing and finding unique reverbs, obviously there are classics that just sound amazing, and that's why they are classics. In addition, we want to set up different timed-based reverbs. So in this very simple way, in this room right now, we'll have a very tiny ambient reverb. That might be 0.3 seconds, let's say. So building on from that, we want to have, at the other end of the scale, this like infinite reverb where the guitar, we hit one note and it just goes on forever. And then we need everything else in between. Now, reverbs aren't just time-based, they impart a sound on it, right? So if we go back to the templates, you'll see that I've got spring reverbs, right? Spring reverbs are ones that you find in guitar amps. They are a coiled spring where the sound flies down it, and they sound really cool. They sound really wobbly, they sound very 60s. And in the 60s they would, well, still today, but in the 60s they developed the spring to be mono. And that imparts, a different sound to it than these stereo springs that I've got, which are wider sounding. They sound more like ambient rooms, really. The mono spring sounds very much like Adele has a mono spring reverb on her vocals, right? So it's that kind of thing. But you can do that. You don't have to stick to the rules. You can mix it up. Ambience, which if this will open, let's have a look. Controls. So there you go, ambient reverb 0.5. This is for 30 quid, I think it was, 25 quid, is an amazing copy of a classic digital reverb. And and the ambient reverb in particular is so hard to find a good one. Rooms, chambers, Beckham is a very, very expensive reverb, a hardware reverb that people buy that costs somewhere between £5,000 and £15,000. And there's some free settings out there, free convolutions of the whole reverb. There's also some companies, depending on who you buy your plugins from, that, what's it called? Slate Digital. They've got Verb Suite Classics, which is a part of Liquid Sonic's reverbs, and they used some of the Beckham convolutions and stuff like that. I've got a Hall, I used the Lexicon, and I use again some of the Beckham convolutions. This is one I've used this reverb in every session for the last 10 years. EOS by Audio Damage. I believe the convolutions are made by Valhalla. and it has an infinite capacity to it. I just think it's fantastic sounding. It blends well with the other ones I've got. This concert reverb, a non-linear reverb, basically something a bit random. Then there's plates, digital plates, piano verb, which is a free one, which is a microphone inside a piano. Valhalla Supermassive, which goes on forever. Then we're going into delays. Delays are different to reverbs, right? Because they have a very short, they have a stop and an end point. Reverbs are like a like that, whereas delays are ping-ponging, and they give, in synchronization with each other, they sound even better. But some things just need a delay, some things just need a reverb. Very popular method is to, if you've done a guitar part, put the guitar on the left-hand speaker, right? But then the right speaker, especially if you listen on headphones, hasn't got anything. So one of the ways we can deal with that is by having a right-only reverb and a left-only reverb, so that they send the guitar to the left, reverb only on the right, and it makes a really cool sound, and it fills the soundscape. It's sort of like something you don't realise is happening. Slapbacks. I've never used Ada, but I've got it anyway. Again, various different classic reverbs, Space Echo, Echo Flex. One of my delays going into a reverb, Crystallizer, is from Sound Toys, that manipulates a weird tickly sort of reverb. Binson is very, very popular delay. I keep saying reverb. So you've got the different settings, got one on a ping pong, and various things. The point I'm getting to here is that, we've got our instrument track, and I can just go to send to whichever one I need to. Need some delay there, done. I don't have to think about it too much. In Logic, you have to set your input-output labels yourself, by the way. So if you're not familiar with send and return, this is the whole process. We're sending out a bit of volume, as much as we'd like to an instrument effect, like a delay, and then the delay is doing its own thing over there. Benefit of doing that is it will cut down on CPU, you'll have more control, and it's just a better way of working. What's great now is that unless I send something to one of these, they don't activate, which means that they're not using CPU. So let's just keep going down. I've got spatial effects. What I do on every single project is something I call the BG swirl. And all it is a reverb, a very long reverb, with this auto pan that basically is sending to the left and right speaker, and it's doing a 360 effect like this, and very, very slowly. So if I send things to it, it just adds this like little weird background information that wouldn't otherwise be there. It's a really nice little thing to do. Flanges, chorus, multi-voices, extra bass. So rather than again doing it on the track, sometimes you don't want to change the sound, you just want to add sub, which these things can do. You just want to add distortion sometimes, you don't want to manipulate the whole sound. So these are all send and returns. Weird effects that I've got, parallel compressions. Parallel compression in particular. Just like if you need to add a little bit of something to a sound, like a little bit sub, then also sometimes you just need to add a little bit of spikiness to certain frequencies. You've got to imagine, and you'll get this through experience, which is when the client comes back and says, I want that snare drum to poke through, but you've got this massive project where you can't get it to poke through. You've got to find solutions to these problems, and when you do, and they work really quickly, you put them into the template, really. So you've got to get into the habit of sort of like analysing songs and mixers and engineers that have worked on those things. For instance, this the classic is Decapitator and Devil Lock, right? These two things set to a certain basic setting, but if you send a snare or a kick drum to them, it will poke through the track. And we don't need to send a lot, and we don't need to have done much. So I believe that is the whole setup. Now, what you'll also see is if you look at composers' masterclasses of the likes of Hans Zimmer and stuff, you will see that they'll open up Cubase or whatever they're working in, and they'll have groups of all the instruments already set out. Now, I hear you asking, when you open up a education masterclass from Hans Zimmer or any of those, they'll have also not just got a template, a mix template, they've also got an instrument template. So they'll have all of their violins already set up, all of their, all the instruments that they usually use. Now, that's amazing to have that ability. But how they're doing that is that they've got banks of server computers, slave computers, that are there dedicated just to operate the violins or operate the whatever, right? When you're using a Mac, I'm using a Mac Mini, brand new one, really, really strong computer, right? And I'm using a combination of SSDs and fast hard drives, but I could never be in a situation at the moment where I can open up a template of loads of different instruments and it actually work. It would just be stuttering, it would crash all the time. So that's why we don't do that, or why I don't do that, right? So you do need dedicated computers. They will have up to 2 or 3 different computers that are just dedicated to a certain library. Like, they'll have the Spitfire audio libraries that they've got, and they'll just have one computer using all its processing power for that. The other reason is that for me personally, I find it more creative to open up a blank page. I don't want to have music that always sounds the same. I want to challenge myself to find new things. But of course, muscle memory, I know where to grab the instruments when I need them. The reason why I do the mix template, believe it or not, is to cut down on CPU and to make things faster. If you're just doing it on a slower computer than the Mac Mini, I haven't tested it, but the new Macs will handle it, but some computers won't. So I was working on a Hackintosh before, until Logic introduced the ability to only activate tracks when they're being used. It did use a lot of CPU, but you can see at the top of this template right now is using 0 CPU. Now obviously that's because nothing's in there, but before you'd open up and it would say that already 30% of CPU is being used. So from a CPU point of view, you don't need to worry too much. CPU is taken up really by the instruments and things like that, and getting to the habit of freezing them. Last and final thing I want to add in is that, what was I going to say? Last and final thing I want to add in is that one of the ways to reduce CPU is to use hardware and audio tracks. And you can see behind me over there an example of that, right? What you can set up, and I hope that you do this, is I've got leads that run from my interface out to certain pieces of gear, like that reel-to-reel player. And that imparts a sound that no one else can get. And those sorts of things make a huge difference. Plus, I can't recreate the sound that it gets in the box at the moment. And a lot of people would say that about lots of gear that they own. You can use guitar pedals, you want to reamp it out to amps and all that sort of stuff. That is equally as important. And it's important to have a track dedicated to those as well, just as you would a plugin or an effect. In terms of plugins and stuff that go on top of a track, if we just do a very quick example, let's say, we've got a part, right, and it's written in. I don't not put stuff on. I'm still gonna want to EQ stuff and compress, but the point is that I don't want to. That those things would be to manipulate that one individual sound, and what we're trying to say is that there are there is a series of events taking place, to which we are here to be able to control each element. So I hope that helps. I'm not going to make the template available. It's up to you to experiment. There is one last thing, which is that I said at the start about that I've that I've calibrated my mix bus and my A, B, C and D. Compressors and EQs, compressors in particular, their reduction and the way that the volume goes in modern digital audio workstations is not the numbers that you see on screen. So I would highly recommend, in Logic, for instance, you have a test oscillator that's punching out 1000 K at a certain level. Let's turn that off, sorry. And then you have a reference plugin, or you use the the amount that the volume says at the start, but some way of referencing the amount of volume that you're getting back. So you're going through the channel with the test oscillator at certain frequencies, in particular at 1K is the most important, and you're making sure that you're actually reducing 1 dB of compression. So you're going in, reducing 1 dB and out, and does that actually give you 1 dB, or does it give you more or less different, right? The other caveat to this is that plugins are developed to not receive 0 dB. They're there to receive a different amount, so you have to bear that in mind. Something to look into. I can go into it in deeper detail if you need to, but I would recommend just understanding the association between what the plugin is doing, what the plugin is saying it's doing is not necessarily correct, and you have to make sure that it is actually doing what it needs to do. Plugins are set to receive minus, I think it's minus 20, but for me that didn't work, right? That just made everything too quiet and too difficult. So I just put it back to 0, and I judged what does 0 give me. And the plugins sound really good. So, yeah, I hope that helps. That's up to you to experiment, and see you soon.